I want to talk about the biggest bet sizing mistake I see poker players make. Just because we have the nuts doesn't mean we should be sizing huge. And just because we have a thin value hand doesn't necessarily mean we should be sizing small. As soon as I stopped sizing my bets based upon the strength of my own hand and started sizing them based upon the strength of my opponent's range, my win rate absolutely catapulted. Catapulted. That's a fun word. So let me show you a few examples. First, I'm going to show you where we have thin value, but maybe we should be sizing pretty big. Let's jump in. All right, so first example here, we've got the 10-8 of clubs. Open it up on the button to 5x because we are in a soft live game where people are not 3-betting and they are calling too much. So going to use a larger open size. Big blind is going to call. Flop comes queen 6-5. He checks it over. As you guys know, single raise pots heads up in position. I'm going to be betting my entire range because range bets are very hard to play against. So I'm going to choose a size where they are hopefully going to raise off their strong shit, but still call with their weak shit. So usually in single raise pots heads up, going to be around 1/2 pot. So I go $25 and the big blind calls. Now we go to the turn and we bink second pair. So here on the turn, I would ask, what category is my hand? Somewhere between thin value and maybe showdown value. You guys probably know my favorite line in live poker where I c-bet the flop, check back the turn with my thin value or showdown value, and then bluff catch the river. This is a really good line for a few reasons. Number one, when we check back the turn, if villain has a very strong hand like a queen, they're just going to come out and bet the river large. Fear and greed drive a ton of live poker players' decisions. So if they have a hand like king queen and the turn goes check, well, they're just going to bet large on the river. 3/4 pot, maybe pot, 2/3 pot. They're going to bet big. If they get to the river with a hand like 7-8 or a busted spade draw, they're often going to bluff as well. But generally, fear drives their decision then, and live poker players generally choose a smaller size, 40% pot, 50% pot, 55% pot. So when they come out and bet the river small, well, they're usually going to have a bluff, and we can just bluff catch with second pair. When they come out and bet the river big, well, they're usually going to have a queen or some type of strong hand like queen 10, so we can just fold. The third possibility, which we're going to see here, the river is a queen, and now they check on the river. So what do they have when they check? Their bluffs usually come out and bet small, and their value usually comes out and bets big. So when they check the river, they have a ton of showdown value, pocket 7s, pocket 8s. So when they check the river, here is one general heuristic I find incredibly helpful when playing live poker. Recreational players check the river to check call because their bluffs are going to come out and bet small here. Their value is going to come out and bet big. So when they check, they have showdown value. They are planning on check calling. So in this spot, I like to ask the inverse question. If I was bluffing on this river, what size would I have to bet to get a hand like pocket 7s or 6x to fold? And I think we would have to go absolutely massive here because when they check this river, all the draws brick, right? 7-8 bricks, 8-9 bricks, 4-3 bricks. Everything basically bricks on this river. And I think if they have a hand like pocket 7s or a 6, they are planning on calling. So this is a spot we only have second pair, no kicker. But this is a spot I think we can bet very big. And this is an exact hand I played live at 5-5, and I bet 1.5x pot on this river. I bet $150. The villain actually snap called, and we were good. So if anything, I think our 1.5x size on the river maybe could have been even a little bit bigger here. So this is spot number one, where we have a thin value hand. Very good spot to go huge, even though we have thin value. All right, next example here, and we've gone through a spot where we are playing a single raise pot. Now let's talk about a 3-bet pot. So we start this one a little bit deeper, just under 250 bigs, 1200 effective here. My MO, I like to play 3-bet pots heads up in position because that's where we are going to realize our edge. If we do a lot of calling, well, the blinds are going to come along as well, and we're just going to be playing bingo where we have to hit a hand to win a pot. When we're playing 3-bet pots heads up in position, that isn't the case. There are 3 possibilities when we play a 3-bet pot heads up in position. Number 1, we make a good hand and we win. Number 2, our opponent does not make a good hand and we win. Or number 3, our opponent makes a good hand and they win. I like those odds. We win 2 out of 3 times in those scenarios. So we are going to 3-bet. Our opponent is going to call. Flop comes queen 8-5. And once again, I'm going to choose a size, hopefully, where they raise off their strong shit and call with their weak shit. So in a 3-bet pot, I generally go somewhere between 30 to 40% pot rather than half pot. Just one little bit of nuance here. So I go 50 into 127. Our opponent does call. Now the turn is a 7. And I think our opponent is going to have a ton of inelastic hands when they call on this flop. They're going to have hands like pocket 9s that are now second pair plus a gut shot. They're going to have hands like jacks and 10s that just aren't going to believe us at a high frequency. They're going to have worse queen X. They're going to have queen jack suited, queen 10 suited, stuff like that. Or they have a flush draw plus a straight draw, a hand like ace 6 of hearts or ace 9 of hearts. So they're going to have a ton of inelastic hands on this turn. They are relatively capped. So most of their range is going to be top pair, second pair, flush draws, combo draws, stuff like that. When they are mostly capped, I'm going to be choosing big bets with a lot of my range here. So we are going to choose the overbet, small overbet. If this was a single raise pot, I may go 1.5x, 2x pot here on the turn. We would like to make sure that hands like pocket nines or king high flush draws stick around, and players get a little bit more sensitive to sizing when the absolute size of the bet gets bigger. So a small overbet here in a 3-bet pot, we go 250 and the villain calls. Now we go to the river, which pairs the board. Villains do tend to get more sticky with made hands. If the board pairs on the flop or the turn, villains get a little bit less sticky with their draws. They're much more willing to let their draws go early on in the hand if the board pairs, but they do get more sticky with their made hands. Now, when the board pairs on the river, we are no longer concerned about draws. If a player has a queen here, are they ever folding? If we got to this river with a hand like 9-10 of hearts or Jack 10 of spades, how much would I have to bet on this river to make our opponent fold a hand like Queen Jack or Queen 10? Even a hand like Pocket Jacks, would our opponent fold that hand to a jam? Queen high board, 3-bet pot, board pairs on the river. What hand do they put us on when we 3-bet pre-flop? Well, usually hands like Ace King. What hands do we lose to on this river? Maybe Ace 5 of hearts and Ace Queen. That's about it. But our opponents are going to get very sticky with top pair. And the way to keep myself logically consistent here, if we had a hand like 9-10 of hearts or Jack 10 of spades and our opponent flipped over a hand like Queen 10 suited or Queen Jack suited, would we ever try to make that hand fold for just over pot here? And my answer would be probably not. Queen high board, 3-bet pot, board pairs on the river. Opponents are going to get relatively sticky. They put us on Ace King pre-flop. All the draws miss. This to me looks like a very good spot to value bet and not all that great of a spot to bluff. So I think on this river, if I had a bluff, if I had Jack 10 of spades here, or if I had 9-10 of hearts here, I may just bluff very small, just trying to get our opponents to fold a hand like Ace X of hearts or King X of hearts. Since our bluffs would want to go small because we think our opponents are never folding Queen X, our value wants to go huge. And yes, we only have top pair second kicker in a 3-bet pot, but I think this is a great spot to jam for value. So we go all in and we get called. All right, guys, real quick, if you're enjoying this video, if you have gotten value from this channel at all, please hit that subscribe button, hit the thumbs up button. It helps us out. It boosts the video in the algorithm and helps it do better things. Thank you, guys. Have a gentle day. All right, next hand here, we've talked about a spot where we're the pre-flop raiser in a single raise pot. We've talked about a 3-bet pot. So let's talk about a spot now where we are the pre-flop caller. So the button is going to open to $20. We're going to defend in the big blind with Ace 10 here. Flop comes Ace 9 deuce. We check and our opponent checks it back. Now the turn is a queen. So I think a mistake that I used to make on these turns myself was just coming out and betting half pot or 3/4 pot or whatever. This is the one type of board where our opponents will actually check back some of their top pair. If they have a weak Ace X suited hand like Ace 4 suited, Ace 5 suited, Ace 7 suited, a lot of those hands on this flop are going to check back. Also, this turn now brings in a bunch of draws. Our opponent can have Jack 10, they can have some Broadway gut shots, they can have some backdoor flush draws. If we bet 2/3 pot, 3/4 pot, whatever the standard size here is, if they have a hand like pocket sixes, they're just folding no matter what. But if our opponent did check back a hand like Ace 5 suited or Ace 7 suited, or they pick up a flush draw here on the turn, they are not folding no matter what size we bet. So I think coming out here on this turn and playing either an overbet or check strategy is pretty good versus most of the population. What if our opponent checked back a hand like Ace King or Ace Queen? And I would say that is rather unlikely. Usually the hands that players check back on these static ace high boards usually going to be the weaker Ace X, the hands like Ace 3 suited, Ace 4 suited. They're just going to generally still bet their strong top pair, their 2 pair, a little bit too much on the flop, and they're just going to check back when they have these weaker top pair hands on these static type dry boards. So I think the play here is to come out and overbet. Our opponent does call. We go to the river, which is a brick. We have a thin value hand. We have top pair, kind of a medium kicker. If our opponent flipped over a hand like Ace 4 suited and we were to ask, okay, how do we make this hand fold? Let's say we get here with a busted spade draw, right? Well, we would have to bet absolutely massive on this river, because the reason why our opponent checks back on the flop with top pair sometimes on these static dry boards is to pot control. So if we were to bluff them off that hand, we would have to go absolutely massive, maybe 3x pot. And I'm not even sure they'd fold all the time for 3x pot here. We may have to go huge to get them to fold an Ace X type holding something. What does that mean when we have value? Well, when we have ace 10, we're just ahead of most of their check back range on this flop, and they have a ton of suited ace X that are going to call. They may even get sticky with a hand like king queen or queen jack because all the draws miss. I think our opponents will massively underbluff when they do have hands like jack 10. I think our opponents will sometimes bluff, but they won't bluff all the time. And the other problem is our opponents won't bet thinly. When they have worse ace X, our opponents will generally just check back here. So when you are playing against typical live opponents who don't value bet thinly and under bluff, usually just taking the betting lead yourself and putting the money in yourself is going to outperform checking. Now, if you're against a very aggressive, very spazzy player, maybe making a deviation here and checking could be good because they will bet thinly and because they will bluff at a high frequency. But in general, against most of the population, I think just putting the chips into the pot ourselves is going to outperform. So here in this spot, we come out on this river and overbet. We bet 200 into 162, just targeting their weak ace X, maybe some of their hands like king queen. We get called and we are good. All right, we've looked at a few spots now where we have thin value, where we may want to size huge. Now let's look at a few spots where we have thick value, where we have kind of nutted hands, but we still may want to size small. Let's jump in. All right, first example here, villain opens under the gun. We're going to 3-bet with the ace 10 suited and back around to our opponent. They are going to call. Flop comes 6-3 deuce with a couple of hearts. So we flop the nut flush draw here. They check it over. We are going to bet our entire range small here in a 3-bet pot. They are going to call. Now the turn is a 5. And on this turn, the question I would ask, is our opponent capped? And the answer here is no, probably not, because our opponents generally are just going to play their draws passively, especially in 3-bet pots. So I think they get to this turn with some flushes. A lot of hands like king, queen of hearts, queen, jack of hearts. When our opponents are uncapped, we generally want to bet small. It will give our opponents incentive to raise off when they have a weaker flush. And also it will allow them to still continue here as a call when they have a hand just like black pocket eights here on this turn. So by betting small when they are uncapped, they will call with a bunch of their weaker shit that we have drawing dead, and they will put in more money for us with a bunch of their flushes. So we're essentially capturing a big bet against their flushes, and we get the extra value against their weaker shit that will still call the small bet. So our opponent checks it over. We are going to bet small, just over 1/3 pot here. Now our opponent is going to call. River now is a 7, and our opponent checks it over. The natural inclination in this spot is, well, we essentially have the nuts here. I don't want to hear the bullshit that 4-7 of hearts is the nuts. If that is your inclination in this spot, this video's not for you. Go away, please. The natural inclination is just, we have good hand, let us bet big. But I think that is wrong because we think about our opponent's range, and our opponent just doesn't really have any flushes here. If they had flushes when we bet small on the turn, they're generally just going to raise off. Our opponent's not really going to have any straights here, right? They opened under the gun. What 4x hands are they going to have? Most opponents usually aren't opening pocket deuces, pocket 3s, pocket 5s. A lot of these hands don't get opened, especially to a 5x opening size from up front. And if they did have pocket deuces or pocket 3s, they'd probably raise off on the flop. What is our opponent's range here on this river? Pocket 8s, pocket 9s, pocket jacks. And the flush has gotten there. There's a one-liner to a straight out there. So I think our opponents are going to be relatively price sensitive on this river. If we got here with an airball bluff, ace jack with the ace of hearts, and our opponent flipped over a hand like pocket 9s, well, this is a pretty good spot to bluff. I think we get pocket 9s, pocket 10s, pocket jacks to fold on this river almost all the time if we just bet somewhere around pot. Even 3/4 pot, I think our opponents are going to fold over pairs quite a lot to us. The flush gets there. There's a one-liner to a straight. Opponents just get scared on these boards. We could get a lot of their range to fold by just going 350, 400 on this river. So that means when we do have value, we probably want to size down. We go 200. Just because we have a very good hand doesn't mean we just get to bet big if we want to make money. We have to constantly be asking, what is our opponent's range? So we bet 200, our opponent reluctantly calls, and we are good. Now, you may be asking, Mark, what's going on with your hair? Why is it like this? Well, Liz isn't home, and I don't know how to put my hair up and make it look normal. And she's not here, and I had to do this video, so this is what you guys get today. You are blessed with this. All right, next one here. This is a real example that one of our coaches played, and in this one, the hijack is going to limp. We're going to ISO with pocket 6s in the cutoff, and the limper is going to call. Flop comes queen, jack 7. Opponent is going to check it over. We are just going to range bet here, c-betting our entire range for a size where they raise off their strong shit call with their weak shit. Coach in this hand went a little bit smaller. Seems okay. You went 25 and the villain calls. And look at that sweet baby there. We bink the set on the turn. Now at this point, I would ask, is our opponent capped? And in general, the answer is yes. Because if our opponent had a hand like pocket sevens or queen jack, when we bet small on the flop, those hands are raising off. So they are capped. I like to use a very big size because our opponents aren't going to put in more money for us if we bet small. If we bet big, queen isn't folding. A hand like queen 10 or queen king, that hand isn't folding. An ace high flush draw isn't folding. Combo draws like 7x of spades, those hands aren't folding. 8-9 of spades, these hands just aren't folding. They have a lot of hands here that are going to be relatively inelastic and are going to call a big bet, but aren't necessarily going to raise and put in more money for us, even if we bet small. We are targeting top pair here. We are targeting straight draws. We are targeting flush draws. We are targeting combo draws. We are going to bet big on this turn, put in the overbet, and our opponent is going to call. Now the river is a queen, and I think this river is super interesting. So you may be asking, well, Mark, why don't we just bet huge on this river then, because our opponent is never folding trips? I do think that betting huge here could be okay. We bet 500, 600 on this river. We overbet. Queen X is never folding. We get paid. That seems pretty good. If we just zoom out and ask, what is our opponent's range getting to the river? Well, it's going to be Queen X. It's going to be trips. It's going to be a ton of busted draws. So if we are playing against an opponent who has any little bit of aggression in their game at all, I think betting very, very tiny on this river could actually outperform betting huge. Oftentimes, if we bet very, very small, our opponents could raise off if they just have a busted draw, like 8-9 or spades here. And also, if we bet small, Queen X is going to put in more money for us. So I think a super creative play that may outperform betting huge is just betting like 1/10 pot or 1/8 pot. So what actually happened in game is our coach, Tom, he bet $40. The opponent snap raised to 250. Tom, of course, just put in the money, expecting that Queen X is not going to be able to fold, and the villain snap folded, which means here that Tom induced this opponent to actually raise with a draw. This is one where, again, just betting big seems fine. Betting very, very big on the river seems like a fine play, but we may actually be able to increase our EV against our opponent's entire range by just betting very, very, very small and getting them to spaz with their draws and just always putting more money for us when they do have trips. All right, another example with thick value here. In this one, we are going to play from out of position. So we 3-bet, the buttons open from the small blind with ace 5 of hearts. Flop comes jack 9-5. And my MO in single raise pots or 3-bet pots out of position, I am checking my entire range against recreational players. They overstab, they telegraph their hand strength with their bet sizing, and they do not protect their check back range. We are going to check here. Our opponent is going to stab small, and with bottom pair plus backdoor nut flush draw, we are going to call. Turn is now a deuce of hearts. We're going to check it over and flow. Now our opponent checks it back, and now the river is a 3 of hearts, giving us the nuts on this river. Let's think about our opponent's range. First of all, they stabbed small on the flop on a dynamic board. Now they checked back the turn. There's tons of straight draws out there. There's now a backdoor flush draw out there. If our opponent had a jack here, they would generally just continue betting. So what is most of our opponent's range when they check back the turn? Well, it's probably going to be a ton of showdown value. 9x, hands like pocket 8s, pocket 6s, pocket 7s. We've given our opponent rope. So if they did have like an open in straight draw, a lot of the time they would just continue barreling on the turn if they were aggressive. If they're passive, if they're just going to give up with their draws on the turn, even if we check to them on this river, that means they are probably just going to check back their draws anyway. So checking is probably not great here. Most of our opponent's range, again, is just going to be kind of weak showdown value. 9x, pocket 6s, pocket 8s. We wouldn't have to bet that much to get our opponent to fold on this river because they're just going to have pretty weak hands here. So if we were trying to get our opponent to fold pocket 8s, we may just be able to bet pot. We should probably be going relatively small when we have value because we would love for a hand like ace 9 or pocket 8s to call here. So even though we have the nuts, our opponent has a weak range. We want to target that weak range to put in a call. So we are going to go very small to make sure pocket 8s call. Third pot, maybe this is a little bit too small to make the point here. Maybe I get a little bit greedier and go 125, 150, because what do our opponents put us on in a 3-bet pot when we check call the flop? Ace king. Maybe I would size this up slightly to 125, 150, but the point still remains. We can't just bet huge on this river because we have the nuts, because our opponent has a weak range and they aren't going to call. All right, guys, hopefully you've enjoyed this video on when to bet huge when you have thin value and when to bet small when you have nutted hands, and this catapults your win rate and turns you into one of the biggest boys possible. Thank you guys and have a gentle day.